Move on to the main focus of tonight's meeting, which is to see the House debate the motion, "This House honours the legacy of Mother Theresa." Owing to the weather, there has been some change in the speaker lineup, so I will actually, for one, I'd like to give an extra thank you to the speakers for braving the weather and making the effort to come here this evening. To propose the motion this evening, we have Peter Williams, a Catholic apologist, writer and human rights activist, and also an atheist turned Catholic, and Mr. James Bogle, a barrister, former chair of the Catholic Union of Great Britain, and probably the only person in this room who actually met and knew Mother Theresa. And to propose the motion this evening, we have Mr. Peter Cave, a philosopher, author, speaker, lecturer, and patron of Humanists UK. And standing in is Mr. David Calhoun, a Durham-based theologian and former Speaker Secretary of the Durham Union. Without further ado, I will please call upon Mr. Bogle to please open the case for proposition.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me to speak, and thank you, Mr. President, for your introduction. When somebody criticises a tiny, elderly Albanian woman for picking up the dying destitute from the streets and babies abandoned in rubbish bins, one must ask oneself, why? And who indeed would do that? Some people would, certainly, and we'll be hearing from them later, no doubt. But let's face it, no one who is not doing at least as much as that particular woman for the dying, destitute and poor is really in a position to criticise her. I think we would all agree with that, at least I hope we would. And when one finds oneself going further and perhaps abusing such a woman for doing so, and doing what she did for the destitute and the dying, one needs to ask a few questions of oneself if one is doing it. You heard that I met Mother Theresa, I knew her, and I simply do not recognise the criticisms made of her by a number of people. She was precisely the woman that the world knew her as. She was precisely the tiny figure you saw behind the podium when she accepted the Nobel Prize, or indeed at any other time. And what you saw was what you got. She was simple, unaffected, sincere. And the only thing I have any recollection that she really disliked was the flashing bulbs of cameras, which of course she had to endure at regular intervals in order to help her raise funds to help the poor. The first such question one might ask if one is criticising her is, what am I doing for the dying, the destitute and the sick poor? And if the answer is nothing, then one might want to think carefully before criticising someone who does do that. If one's answer is, for example, like Paris salon Marxist Tariq Ali, another critic of Mother Theresa, that he is working for world revolution and therefore he needn't do anything else for the poor, I think that most people would agree he should stop kidding himself. What has world revolution ever done for the poor, you might think, asking in a Monty Python-esque sort of a way? Well, the answer is, at best made them poorer, at worst tortured, imprisoned and or murdered them. And in any case, one has also got to ask oneself, what happens to the poor while they are supposedly waiting for the glorious revolution to bring its mythical paradise to earth? Do we just leave them to die in the gutter, destitute and poor? Do we just leave babies abandoned in rubbish bins until Tariq Ali and his revolutionaries have finally taken over? I don't think so. And I don't think anyone thinks so, and thank goodness Mother Theresa certainly didn't think so. But that doesn't stop some from traducing her legacy and memory in a manner that I think can really only be described as fairly shameful. The late Christopher Hitchens didn't shrink from calling Mother Theresa Hell's Angel. I suppose he was trying to be funny, but then, as always, I suggest Christopher was simply seeking the cheap shop headline so as to fatten his own coffers, already fat from a lifetime spent largely sniping from the sidelines. But in a very amusing way, one must admit. It's difficult, though, I would suggest to you, to take seriously criticism from a man who claims, or claimed, he is of course deceased, to loathe dictators, but whose favoured Red Revolution produced the worst dictators, arguably, that the world has ever seen. It's difficult to take seriously criticism from a man who berated Mother Theresa for laying a wreath on the tomb of the late leader of her own homeland, Albania. the late unlamented Henry Hodger, when Hitchens himself championed the very same Red Revolution that men like Hodger championed. It's difficult to take seriously the criticism of a man who, as an atheist, extolling the benefit of atheist states, was himself completely blind, so it seems, to the sheer unmitigated horror of atheist states like Stalin's Soviet Union and Mao's Red China. Although, to be fair, he did criticise both, but omitted to mention, whenever he did so, they were, of course, both states with atheist governments. And Christopher couldn't ever bring himself to recognise the simple fact that the most atheist state on the planet today is North Korea. Indeed, he seemed to think it was some kind of religious state. Well, actually, no, it isn't. Its guiding philosophy is an atheist philosophy. The attack on Mother Teresa is, I suggest to you, and put it to you, simply part of a global assault on the Catholic Church and on Catholicism. Certainly that seems to have been part of Christopher Hitchens' assault on the memory of the late Mother Teresa. And apropos attacking the Catholic Church, let me also either inform you or remind you that the most persecuted religion in the world today is in fact Christianity. Indeed, even Hillary Clinton publicly stated on more than one occasion that Christians are, for example, facing genocide in the Middle East. Seemingly, it is the one religion today which can be attacked with impunity and by anybody and anyone at any time, anyhow, in any manner. Compared with these attacks, however, I think it's fair to say the criticisms of Arab Chatterjee, who was going to be here to speak for the con side, but unfortunately couldn't make it. I think his wife has a broken arm. But his criticisms are, by comparison with those of Christopher Hitchens, relatively mild. But they are also inaccurate, or at least exaggerated. I understand they form the basis of the later, more public criticisms made by Christopher Hitchens, but Christopher, in his own inimitable fashion, seems to have seized upon them, made them his own, and managed to exclude poor old Arab altogether from the programmes that he subsequently made. Let me give you an example. Arab says that Mother Teresa claimed to rescue 9,000 people from the streets of Calcutta every day. Well, I never heard her say that. There's no evidence for such a claim, and given the slender resources of her sisters, it would frankly be quite impossible. In fact, it would be possible even if the resources were fairly healthy. On the basis of allegations like this, however, Arab calls Mother Teresa a pathological liar. Yes, actually called her that, i.e. somebody who's mentally ill. Sorry, but I don't think so. He criticises her, for example, for not having an ambulance service and for telling people to use Calcutta City's ambulance service when one is needed by ringing the corporation. So Mother Teresa is to be criticised for not having enough money to run an ambulance service. Really? He even criticises her for not caring about poor people. Well, that's a big one. Saying that the poor meant nothing to her, but were, to her, according to Arab, faceless people who were not allowed even to have names. It is, of course, nonsense. What are we to think of people who, whilst doing nothing or little for the destitute or the sick poor, the abandoned children themselves, nevertheless give themselves the right to attack and abuse Mother Teresa in that sort of way? Well, I think perhaps they can do better, let's just say. I think I prefer the way that Mother Teresa cared for the poor than the way that her critics did not and do not. In reality, this is not just the criticism of an elderly Albanian woman and her colleagues, I suggest to you. I suggest there's a hidden agenda here. The real agenda is religious vilification of the Catholic Church. And as I said, Christianity is the most persecuted religion in the world today. If Mother Teresa had been an agnostic or an atheist, would our opponents be criticising her in quite the same way? Well, I suggest to you, probably not. Where are the humanist and atheist leper colonies, homes for the dying destitute and for the sick poor? Well, there may be some, but they're not in plentiful supply. The late Malcolm Muggeridge, British journalist and author responsible for making Mother Teresa so well known globally, A secular humanist in his early life, indeed for most of his life, before a late conversion to Christianity, once notably remarked as follows, and I quote, "I've spent a number of years in India and Africa where I found much righteous endeavour undertaken by Christians of all denominations. But I never, as it happens, came across a hospital or orphanage run by the Fabian Society or a humanist leper colony. Well, perhaps there are some, but let's face it, not many. At least if there are some, we haven't heard about it. The truth is that the Catholic Church, on the other hand, has provided very significant contribution to healthcare around the world. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church is the largest non-government provider of healthcare services in the world, bar none. It manages fully 26% of the world's healthcare facilities. It is part of its philosophy, it's part of its theology, it's part of its teaching. And Mother Teresa's nuns simply followed that teaching and followed the same tradition. Indeed, in the Middle Ages, monasteries and convents were the key medical centres for most of Europe. And indeed, modern science itself may be said to owe its origins to Catholic scientists, many of them priests. Does that mean the end of my part? Let me then conclude with this. I remember a story that Mother Teresa herself told me. In fact, it was my own experience. She continued to work right up until the end of her days, but she obviously came a time when she was too old to be able to do anything. And I was organising an event when she was coming and due to speak. And I thought, well, how am I going to get hold of this woman who is effectively the chief executive officer of her organisation? If I ring up, I'm bound to be given short shrift. I telephoned. I thought I might as well. I got through to Calcutta and I asked on the phone, may I speak to Mother Teresa? And the voice on the end of the phone said, Mother Teresa speaking. You can imagine my surprise. But in fact, that is how she was. She took her turn answering the phone, just like any other of the sisters in her order, and she took on every other job that all of the sisters did in caring for the poor. Whatever it was, bookkeeping, answering the phone, washing, cleaning, all the rest of it she did until she could no longer do it. She didn't ever retire, she simply got old and died. But that is the way she was. The suggestion by some, including Eric, Chatterjee and others, is that she, after a time, became a famous personality and never touched a poor person again. This is simply not true, and I know this from my own experience. She carried on doing it, she did it until she could do it no more. That is the way she was. Truly, I suggest to you, she was one of the world's more remarkable and extraordinary women, and I invite you on that basis to support the motion. Thank you very much.